She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For Crow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Crow, Dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Crow, Dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country.
Good evening and welcome to yet another program of Anansi Web Education. It's saying, come and tell the people about the sweet story about life in the country. Anansi Web Education has been telling you guys the sweet stories. Some of the stories are not so sweet, but our objective is to ensure that we tell a story so that we cannot forget, or the young generation or generations to come cannot forget about the story or the many stories, whether sweet or not so sweet. And that is what we do every week right here on Anansi Web Education. President Granger, good night. How are you, sir?
Thank you for having me on the program. It's always a good experience to share experiences of the past with the purpose, with the aim of looking forward to ensure that the next generation could enjoy a better life than we had. So I'm glad to be here, and all my best wishes to you and your viewers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Always good to have you here. And life in the country, the sweet stories. I know you oftentimes, I ask you about how is your kitchen garden going. I just want to show you about how our kitchen garden is going. Take a look. Take a look at what's going on there. Take a look
very
at the
good.
tomatoes.
Oh, lovely tomatoes, yes.
Take a look, and the watermelon, and then callaloo, and yep. Take a look.
That's good.
That's it. That's my kitchen garden.
There should be more of that in Guyana.
Absolutely. President Granger, again, good night to all of you who are watching us wherever you are, whether you're in Guyana, outside of Guyana. And we say hi, a special hello to the folks in Linden. We know what you're going through. Our prayers are with you guys. Our prayers are with you guys, and not only in Linden, but throughout the country. Tonight's topic is we're dealing with communities, right? And just to remind you folks that the People's Progressive Party entered office in 1990. Well, maybe we're getting it a little bit mixed up here with regards to our topic, and so we just want to have our operator put the correct stuff up there. So my apologies. We have dealt with the partnership.
I think you are correct. I think it is correct. The PPP did enter office in 1992.
Okay, yeah. So we are on the right track. Sorry about that. I was just about to send this note to Lemon, but thank you so much. But we are on the right track. So the People's Progressive Party entered office in 1992, but its tally of votes in the general and regional elections after 1997 fell in 2001, it fell in 2006, and it fell in 2011. The PPP, and I want you guys to come a little closer and listen to this. After the PPP votes, the tally of votes fell in the general and regional elections. In 97, it fell in 2001, it fell in 2006, and it fell in 2011. Guess what the PPP did, guys? The PPP, they resorted to trickery and treachery to win majorities. Its most serious threat was the emergence of a partnership of national unity in 2011. It was a threat. It was a serious threat. So now our topic here for tonight, Anansi Web Education, this program, as we examine the topic, the Shurian plot Some of you might be asking, what exactly is the Shurian plot? With the aim of addressing the following questions, I will ask President Granger to respond to the first question as it pertains to the Shurian plot. What was the cause of the Shurian plot in party politics? Mr. Granger?
Well, I would say that the plot emerged. Maybe the name might be a little strange, but it was the name given to a conspiracy that arose because of the parlor situation in which the PPP found itself at the beginning of this century. It was a multifaceted problem. And I think we have to understand, even though maybe it's just well for older persons, 24 years may not be a long time, but people who were only 24 years old now cannot understand what was taking place then. To start with, there was a very violent phase called the Troubles, in which over 1,400 murders took place over a very short period of time. This was caused lately by mismanagement of the public security sector. And it was caused in large part by narcotics trafficking, and the drug lords or the drug gangs were murderous at that time, and many young people were killed. There was also a problem in public health, that many young mothers were dying in the hospitals, and much wasn't being done. I remember my wife and I would go to the public hospital in Georgetown on Christmas morning, and you had to walk sideways between the beds because sometimes you had two mothers on one bed, and it was a terrible situation. And then there was a public infrastructure problem. Lorries going into the hinterland with the bridges were bad, the roads were bad, and in general, the country was facing a lot of problems. Public education system, there were a lot of dropouts. Children were not going to school, and there was generally a mismanagement of public security. There was also there were also serious problems in trafficking in persons and trafficking in narcotics, trafficking in guns and so on in the hinterland, trafficking in persons. And international society was very critical of Guyana at that time. The economy was in a tailspin. And in Parliament now, you had a situation after 2011 in which, although the PPP held the presidency of the country and actually appointed the ministers, the majority of seats were held by the Partnership of National Unity and Alliance for Change. So it was a minority government, and the scrutiny that was exercised on the PPP was very difficult for the PPP to bear, because they never saw this type of scrutiny before. They had to explain everything, and sometimes the budgets were cut. Sometimes the projects which they tried to advance, like a mile of fall, people scrutinized it and said, no, this can't work. Up to now, it can't work. And the specialty hospital, we said, yes, we need hospitals, but hospitals for the poor, for the people. Specialty hospital is for tourists. And, we wanted a public health system which was rooted in primary health care for, clinics for young mothers and maternity clinics and, clinics for older folks. So we had a completely different approach to the PPP. So when you look at the economy, when you look at public infrastructure, public education, public security, and then you add it to the legislative scrutiny that the PPP was under, you can see the PPP was, they suffered from a panic attack. And the votes between the end of 1997 and 2011, PPP lost over 54,000 votes. This hadn't happened before. So I'm just trying to paint the picture of why this plot came about. Because the PPP at that time decided to rather than improving governance, which they didn't know how to do it or what to do, they decided to try to undermine the leadership of the PNC and the leadership of APNU. And at that time, the leadership of the opposition, all three were the same. The same person who was leader of the PNC, who was leader of the APNU, was opposition leader. So the PPP was under intense pressure. And I would say that this Shurian plot was maybe an act of desperation. And they tried to intervene in the PNC's 18 Biennial Delegates Congress in July 2014 because of all of these factors which had come together to make the PPP administration, look very weak. You can remember, my friends, that even local government, the PPP was, rather than hold local government election for about 20 years, the PPP refused to hold local government elections. And they were just going around the country removing elected neighborhood democratic councils and installing people of their own choice in what they call IMCs, interim management committees. So everything seemed to be going wrong simultaneously. And the PPP, rather than try to rectify the problem or solve the problems, decided to attack the PNC's leadership. Not the whole PNC, the leadership of the PNC. And that's what the Shurian plot was about. It was a plot. It was a conspiracy. And it was the first time we've seen it happen. Parties were always opposed to one another, but the plot was a new type of crime against another political party.
So you're talking about that, the Shurian plot, because the PPP was desperate then, as they are even more so desperate now. So the plot might be thickening. But let's get back to the second question of the desperation of the PPP through what we coined here, the Shurian plot. Second question, President Granger. When did the Shurian plot have its gravest and greatest impact?
I would say that things came to a head in 2014. That was a key year because by that time, I think the majority of Guyanese realized that they just had enough of the PPP. And the APNU and AFC together had a majority in the National Assembly. And it was decided that unless the PPP would hold local government elections, and we believed in local government elections because it put power in the hands of the neighborhoods, it put power in the hands of the ordinary communities. And the PPP was simply going around the country, removing, elected NDCs and ruling directly from 4th Street, Kingston, by creating this interim management committees. And I personally picketed, people feel that I don't go on the street. I personally picketed, the office of the president at that time. And we decided that unless the PPP held local government elections, we would bring a vote of no confidence against them. The AFC supported it, the vote of no confidence. And as a result of that, by 2014 November, pay attention to the date, 2014 November, the president of the day was forced, well, maybe he wasn't forced, he decided to prorogue parliament, which means suspended parliament for 6 months. This was constitutional, but it was abnormal. It was a sign of weakness. And it had its impact in 2014 because PPP was faced with being thrown out of office. And rather than go back to parliament, the PPP decided to suspend parliament in November 2014. So it had its greatest impact in 2014. But my friends, it was in 2014 that the PNC had its biennial delegates Congress, its 18th Congress. Remember, at that time, the leader of the PNC was also leader of Partnership for National Unity. He was also a leader of the opposition. So the PPP felt that by destroying this person's authority, they would be able to solve their political problems. So I would say it became a matter of survival for the PPP to try to undermine the credibility of the PNC's 18th Delegates Congress in July 2014. So that is my answer to you, that it had its greatest impact in 2014 when the PPP president was forced to prorogue Parliament, and when the PNC was having its Congress in July. So he decided to use the Congress or to torpedo the Congress in order to solve a political problem outside of Congress. That is what I would say was the gravest and greatest in 2014. And the target was the PNC's 18th Biennial Delegates Congress.
Thank you so much, dear, for that. Interesting, very interesting. It's giving folks an idea as to what really transpired these party Congress and so forth and so on. But not only that, the desperation on the part of the PPP, desperation to try to manipulate a system through what is coined here as the Shurian plot. The Shurian plot. Good night to those of you who are now joining us, and welcome to Anansi Web Education. The Shurian plot. Again, for those of you who just joined us, we are going through the topic tonight is giving you information as to what happened with the votes. Because from 1992, the tally of votes in the general and regional elections after 97, it fell. Then in 2001, it fell. In 2006, it fell even further. And in 2011, it got worse for the PPP. And so the PPP had to go around their table and sit down and discuss and come up with all sort of trickery and treachery in order to win majorities. You all know what happened in 2011. They tried a thing to get a one-seat majority, but they were caught. So tonight's program is very important as you listen to the trickery and the treachery of the PPPC as they go about trying to get a majority. Don't think for a moment that they have stopped. They haven't. They will keep trying. They keep trying and trying and trying. This takes me to the third question, President Rajan. Why was the Shurian plot supported by dissidents? Why, sir?
This is, I suppose you can say there was a matter of speculation, but there was also a question of fact. At that time, the PPP had made use of slush funds in what was called the community development committees, as well as the President Youth Choice Initiative. Now, the money going to the President Youth Choice Initiative was from the Lotto funds. The Lotto had to pay a certain portion of its revenue to the government. That money should have gone into the consolidated fund so that it could be supervised by the government and it would have to be approved by Parliament. The PPP kept it from going into the consolidated fund. Secondly, the community development councils was another invention. And although the National Drainage and Irrigation Authority had responsibility for cleaning all of the drains and the parapets and so on, millions of dollars were put into the Community Development Council. Once it went in, the head of the CDC was, yes, Ms. Shuri. And the head of the CDC was a politician. She wasn't an appointed public servant. She was a politician, and she was made head of the CDC. So you can understand why it's called a Shurian conspiracy now, because she had millions of dollars at her disposal. And when the APNU got into government, we were able to discover that the money was being properly accounted for. And they would go into certain communities, and the communities themselves would be aware of the PPP's attempt to undermine the communities. And rather than allow the communities to elect their own leaders, the CDCs were trying to impose leaders who the communities were suspicious of. I'm not saying they were good or bad people, but what I'm saying is that the role of the CDC under Ms. Philomena Sahai Shuri, was sometimes subversive of the very aims and objectives of those communities. And in Poker Street, I don't know if you know Wismar, this scene is from Poker Street in Wismar. And notoriously, the attempt to impose one of these CDCs was resisted by the people of Poker Street in Linden. So you can see that it was not a straightforward matter, that people knew what the CDCs were up to. And the good people of Linden resisted the imposition of, in that particular case. But in other cases, the plot was supported because the CDC brought money and millions of dollars of money of funds, because the accountability and transparency were very low. And I would say that some people received stipends for work they didn't do. Some people received stipends because they were affiliated to the PPP and they were prepared to do the PPP's bidding. And as far as the Congress was concerned, now, this is a completely different kettle of fish, because for the Congress, some people were late in the day. Maybe they were unaware of the PNC's constitution, but they were signed up and told that they would be delegates to the 18th Congress, when in fact they were not qualified, because you have to serve a certain period of time, you have to belong to a group. And these rules were breached. They didn't belong to groups, and they did not have the length of service to qualify to be party membership, to party members. So the accreditation process was flawed. Secondly, they may not have been aware of the fact that for the entire week prior to the Congress, or during which preparations were being made for Congress, the PPP or somebody was placing advertisements in the newspapers, very costly advertisements. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to advertise in the newspaper, whole page advertisement every day of the week. And most of the issues in those advertisements were issues that the PPP was pushing in Parliament. And, we don't have time to go through all the issues now, but there were good reasons, economic reasons, strong reasons why some of these measures were resisted. For example, Amila Falls, and everybody knew that a well-known Guyanese paper published a picture of the Amila Falls, which during dry season had been reduced to a trickle and was completely dry. So people knew that it was a bogus scheme, and we weren't prepared to support that. But I wouldn't go through that. The fact is that for the entire week, whole page advertisements were directed to be delegates going to the PNC Congress. This was done by the PPP with money from where? Probably money provided from the Community Development Council and that Shurian system that existed there. Thirdly, people were given stipends. Money was being diverted, and transportation was provided. One region was able to rent these huge buses to bring delegates down to Congress. They had a whole list of complaints about, registration, which, if they knew the PNC's constitution, they could have planned this maybe years before by going into bona fide groups and participating in party activities. But some were just run by a football ground and signed up, and they didn't attend a single meeting. They didn't know what the party stood for, but they were just told to join the bus and come and vote. And as a result of that, up to the last day of Congress, when the elections were being held, protests were still being made about membership. This doesn't happen in the PNC. It ought not to happen in the PNC. And then they decided to use brute force. And some people who were not allowed to go into Congress barged into Congress. I see the question is, why was it supported by dissidents? Because they got money. it's sad to say, but this was not a large number of people. The large number of people you can see was sitting down quietly in Congress when these things were happening. But people were paid to disrupt Congress and to bring the People's National Congress reputation into disrepute. And I would say that, answer to the question, people behave this way, dissidents behave this way, either through ignorance, that they didn't know what the Constitution had called for, or they were, perhaps misinformed about what the purpose of the protest was all about. And, they participated in this conspiracy unknowingly, because they were told that the leadership of the PNC was perhaps at fault, when in fact it wasn't at fault in these matters. These were inventions by the PPP propaganda, which they were able to publish whole page ads for an entire week. So you see, my friends, the dissidents might have been ignorant, but some people were intentionally collaborating with the CDCs to get money to do these things. No one could pretend that there was complete ignorance of where the money was coming from to pay for advertisements, to pay for transportation, to pay for stipend, to pay for uniforms. The party color was green, and everybody knows that. But suddenly you saw a group of young persons, mostly young women, in T-shirts with slogans, with placards. Never happened before, never happened since. But 2014, the Biennial Delegates Congress was the scene of this type of commotion. And then, people, storming, it's a crazy scene. People were actually storming the hall where the Congress was being held. The commotion caught the public eye, caught the media, because some of the dissidents actually told the media, come, you can see something today. So this is the damage that the Shurian conspiracy wrought to bring the PNC into disrepute. And people probably went away with the notion that the PNC was a disorderly party, when in fact the disorder was caused by the People's Progressive Party pumping dirty money, coming state funds, in order to cause disruption. That is what happened in July 2014. And I'm saying that some of the dissidents were perhaps ignorant of the Constitution, but some others were intentionally setting out to bring down the leadership of the PNC in order to satisfy the ambitions of the PPP, which wanted to destroy APNU, destroy the PNC as a force that was bringing these low scores repeatedly after elections. And fortunately, by 2015, you can see that the PPP plot had failed, the Shurian conspiracy had failed, and we were able to ensure that the APNU-AFC coalition was able to get into government. But I would say that the dissidents were, some of them were fooled, but some of them definitely knew what they were doing, and they knew they were agents of the People's Progressive Party to bring down the first six-party coalition this country has ever seen. And the damage that was done there, has had a lingering and lasting effect. But I would say 10 years ago, we shouldn't forget what happened in July 2014. And it was supported out of ignorance, but it was also supported by persons who expected to benefit from the conspiracy. And some people were paid a pittance, because of course the money, you can't buy a car or build a house with that sort of money. But people were induced into participating in that mutiny or that revolt.
Thank you so much. Listening. Hope you guys heard, and obviously after tonight's program, we'll walk away with a better understanding. Back then, they had the Youth Choice Initiative headed by Odinga Lumumba, who is off the scene physically, but is not necessarily completely out of whatever may be transpiring behind the scenes for the PPP. The Youth Choice Initiative was headed by Odinga Lumumba, and the CDC community programs headed by Philomena Sohoy Shuri, the late Philomena Sohoy Shuri, who was, after a deal with the PNC, became deputy mayor of Georgetown, with Randolph Jordan being the mayor. That didn't last for too long. However, you're walking away with some sort of idea as to what the trickery, the PPP, the trickeries that they were up to, and they still are. It has intensified. The Youth Choice Initiative was, in my opinion, being used as cash grants, the CDC cash grants. But today, we're seeing bigger cash grants around the country that is being used to seduce voters, seduce citizens. Final question, though, Mr. Granger, on this topic of the Shurian plot. How did the Shurian plot affect a partnership for national unity?
This is a difficult question to answer because I can say that it probably affected the partnership in two ways. One was positive, that we realized that it wouldn't be plain sailing, that we are fighting against powers and principalities and the princes of darkness, and that you couldn't close your eyes when you're dealing with the PPP and expect the PPP to play fairly. That you had here a party which was prepared to fund a conspiracy to undermine the leadership of another party. I don't think there was any parallel in Guyanese politics. I know some parties, try to, induce other members to go over, to cross the line as in Parliament. And of course, the APNU suffered from that. But this is the first occasion in which you saw a sitting government, using state funds to run a campaign to remove the leadership of another party. And this is what the PPP tried to do to the PNC in July 2014, knowing very well that the PNC was at the hub of the Partnership for National Unity and was the hub of the opposition. So they tried to kill three birds with one stone, literally. But that was the negative side. On the positive side, I would say that we became stronger. We realized that you couldn't close your eyes when dealing with the PPP, and that it helped to solidify, the cooperation and the collaboration among six parties. The first time it has happened in Guyana, that six parties came together and to form an administration. Of course, there were difficulties and differences of opinion, but I think it made us stronger. Unfortunately, there was a lapse, as 4 years later in 2018, December 2018, when a member of one of those partners in the APNU, AFC coalition, a member of the Alliance for Change, actually voted against the coalition. So you can see that the welfare, the well-being, or the integrity of a coalition is never perfect, and eventually it was affected. The APNU AFC coalition was affected by the behavior of one member of the Alliance for Change. But I would say that on one hand, the Shurian plot or conspiracy had a positive effect, but on the other hand, it had a negative effect. And I think the PPP discovered it was possible. It was possible, and they discovered this, and they made it. They came again in December 2018. It was possible to create that little the dissidence or disenchantment within such a large coalition, and they actually succeeded in bringing the coalition down. So I would say that the negatives eventually outweighed the positive, and the PPP was able to use a different approach. Rather than the Shurian policy, the Shurian conspiracy, it was able to directly approach one dissident member of parliament. So I suppose the Guyanese people learned very well that the integrity of the PPP is not something you could take for granted. That the PPP would do anything to hold on to power, and this is what happened not only in July 2014 but also in December 2018. A lot of lessons. You learn a lot of lessons when you're dealing with the PPP. A lot of lessons in politics, hard lessons, and I hope the Guyanese people understand that.
Thank you so much, President Granger. Really appreciate the insight. Just to remind you guys, in case some of you may have joined us late, we are giving you information about the general and regional elections and how the tally of votes in the general and regional elections after 97, it fell. In 2001, it fell. It went farther down. In 2006, it got worse. In 2011, well, we know they couldn't help themselves. They tried to give themselves a majority, but they got caught in the elections, remember? And that is why when they got caught, Donald Ramotar became a minority president as a result of being caught. So the PPP, they resorted to trickery and treachery in order to win majorities. And that is why it's important, guys. That is what they're doing, the cash grants and all these things. You've got to be careful, got to be careful. President Granger, thank you as always. We dealt with the Shurian plot, the Shurian plot. It has not disappeared. In fact, it has intensified. As the Guyanese would say, the man and woman out there in the streets would say, dep on your guard, dep on your medi. Y'all, dep on y'all medi. Y'all wake up before it's too late. President Granger, thank you so much. I noticed you smiled when I said, dep on your guard, dep on your medi. Dep on your medi. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and good night to you and your viewers and listeners to this excellent program. It's always a pleasure being on Anansi Web Education. Thank you and good night.
Always a pleasure. And the good days, the smiles and the happiness on people's faces. Oh, how we long for the return of the good days. And all Guyanese will live according to their motto, the country's motto. One people, one nation, one destiny. Thank you so much, President Granger. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. And to all of our listeners, wherever you are, thank you all so much as well. God bless you. And God bless our beautiful country.
All day I back down, me now I come home. Inaga, jackass, I for fetchy load. Walk, Lishayan, bag over shoulder, run.